Now, here we go with our Belmont Net Zero Modern Virtual Tour. So I'm going to hand it off to Matt and Ryan. They will be your tour guides here. We'll go through all of the ins and outs of this great, beautiful home. And again, the Q&A at the end. So with that said, take it away, Matt and Ryan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Chinese. I'm the architect and project manager for the Belmont Net Zero project.
And I'm Ryan McCarthy. I'm the production manager for Auburndale Builders, and been on the Concord Ave project for the past better part of 4 years.
We'll get into why it's taken that long, so Zero Energy Design has been designing passive homes as well as multifamily projects for the past 15 years. Our team includes 5 certified passive house consultants, of which I am one. Basically, ZED includes passive house design principles on all of our projects, regardless of whether a client or owner is seeking certification. And one of the things that makes us unique is the fact that we do both the architectural and mechanical design. One of our partners handles all the mechanical design of our homes.
And at Auburndale Builders, we've been in business for 16 plus years. We specialize in residential construction, high performance building and remodeling. We built the first certified passive house in Wayland, the first all electric net positive home in Newton that was designed by Zero Energy Design. Our office in Nonantum is the first certified passive commercial office in Newton. And this is our 3rd project working with Zero Energy Design. Before I pass it off to Matt, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the team of trade partners and subcontractors that we have been working with on this project. Like I said, for the better part of 4 years, they're the guys that help us make these projects happen and make them successful. This is a challenging project, and they were willing to do something a little bit different from some conventional work. They were willing to train with us and have been very patient as we work through it. I also want to recognize Zen Saito of Auburndale Builders. He's the site manager, and he's been on site pretty much the entire project, working out all the details and managing everything on site. And he's just done an incredible job. And I'll let Matt take it from there.
So the homeowners bought the property that had an existing 1960s split level house on it. There was the house sort of on the right-hand side and the garage on the left. And basically, we'll get into it more, but they were initially looking to do an addition and then a remodel of the existing home. And it ended up becoming completely new construction. So when they first approached us, basically they really wanted to take advantage of the site, which is adjacent to a nature preserve, and really be able to, when you came into the front of the property, also see basically through the house to that rich landscape beyond. And that also meant being able to utilize the entire site for entertaining and just their own enjoyment. And that was on top of the basics that goes with any project we do, which is that it's going to be a healthy indoor air quality as well as low carbon living. So there's several criteria to a net zero energy home. First and foremost is thoughtful design, and we're going to sort of dive into each of these topics throughout this presentation. But like thoughtful design would be something like proper solar orientation. The next really big one would be a super insulated airtight building envelope. And basically we want to keep the conditioned air where we want it, which is inside, not leaking outside. With that super insulated airtight envelope, we can then use high efficiency mechanical systems. And the purpose there is to keep our money where we want it, which is in our pockets, again, not leaking outside. And then we'll move on to renewable energy. And basically with those high performance systems and the super insulated airtight envelope, we get to about an 80% reduction in energy usage of the home. And we need those PV arrays or other renewable energy systems to get us that remaining 20%. Second to last but not least is designing it really means nothing unless it gets built with careful thought and planning. And that's where Auburndale comes in on several of our projects. And last but not least is post-occupancy monitoring. So we want to be sure that, after we've left the site, that the house is actually performing the way we designed it and the way we spent a lot of time building it. So diving a little bit deeper into the design aspect of the project, solar orientation is a must. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, all of our homes are designed with passive design principles in mind, and the sun is giving us a lot of free energy. So we really want to have large glazing on the southern side, and then minimal glazing on the north, west, and east, just to basically avoid that heat loss that typically occurs through openings, as well as glare on the eastern western sides during sunrise and sunset. The other critical thing with proper orientation of the house is making sure that the roof is basically aligned so that we can maximize the sun's rays for the PV array. And just to be clear, when I say PV array, I mean a photovoltaic array. So the thing you put on your roof to capture the sun's energy. Sort of another critical big picture part of the design is also capturing views. And we'll see it later when we look at more of the floor plans, but we really want to be sure that we're looking through the house, capturing the views of the yard, potentially restricting views, if they don't want to see part of their neighbor's yard, things like that. So that's kind of the big picture design for this project. So, the goal of hiring an architect and really thinking through the design is we want to optimize for our clients' lifestyle, the aesthetics that they're looking for, capturing that great natural light and views, all while considering the thermal comfort of those spaces and their energy consumption. And so that really becomes a pretty delicate balance of the components of the site, the house's orientation, the form, the layout of the spaces within the house. And as I mentioned earlier, the glazing, and then last but not least, material also plays a role. So in terms of siting, you can see how basically there's two forms or two rectangles almost on the site, and the reason was because we phased the project, and the existing house was on the right-hand side and the garage was on the left-hand side, and we started by demolishing the garage and building phase one. And the goal was that once we built phase one, the homeowners would move into phase one while we renovated the existing home. And after they moved into phase one, we started doing, polishing up the design for the renovation. They realized that they really, really liked the quality of the new construction. And when we were pricing it with Auburndale, the cost benefit ratio of renovation versus new construction was getting narrower and narrower. So we ultimately ended up demolishing the existing home and building phase two for basically what's now a whole brand new home. And as Ryan mentioned, that's been 4.5 years or so in the making. And before we move on to the floor plans, you can kind of see how when you come into the site on the lower side, we basically wanted to create a channel through the house that really captured those views of the backyard right from the start. And the other thing is that it's off of a fairly busy street. So we also kept the house basically where the existing home was, which is kind of in the middle of the street, in the middle of the property, to mitigate against street noise and also create both a really nice front yard that will capture those nice warm southern light, as well as the northern side of the property, which has access to the nature preserve. So looking at the floor plans, again, we've got the phase 1 is on your left and phase 2 is on the right of each of those images. So the existing house was a split level, and that really that plus the grading of the property really meant that phase 1 had to be a split level as well, so that everything lined up. And then that dominoed into phase 2 also being a split level. So big picture on phase 1, on the left-hand image, we'll start and we'll work our way up on phase 1, and then we'll talk about phase 2. So on the left-hand image, you'll see that we've got a storage room and mechanical room on the lowest most level, followed by a guest suite. And then moving up to the entry level, we have a garage. With a half flight up from there, we've got the owner's suite. And then going up to the topmost level of phase 1, we have an office. And then looking at phase 2, again, from the lowest level, we have a multi-purpose room and second mechanical room, the family room, a half flight up from there. And then at the entry level, we have living, dining, kitchen, mudroom, and then going up another half flight, we've got a loft and another bedroom. And then at the uppermost level on the right-hand image, we have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, as well as a small laundry room. So with that sort of floor plan worked out, we really needed to also think of orientation. Again, capturing that great southern sunlight, as well as the northern views. Really, wanted the house to be this sort of these narrow rectangles that allowed that view through the middle. And what you can see is we had angular forms at the front of the house just to align with the client's aesthetic directives, but then we simplified it in the back where we really didn't need to spend those extra dollars. And if we move on to the renderings, we can see that we used a white fiber cement on those angular forms and at the second floor, and then we used a shiplap cedar siding for both the first floor as well as the rear rectangular volumes. And on that left-hand image, the darker volume is actually the breakfast nook, and that's wrapped in an open slat cedar siding that's just stained black. And that really gives us a nice sort of geometric composition for the house. The other thing you can see in the right-hand image is that the homeowner towards the end of the project actually decided that they wanted a roof deck on both phases of the house. And they did not want to have to start tearing up the work that was already done. So Ryan and I put our heads together along with our structural consultant, Brian Walsh, and found a solution where we could use an exterior stair and bridge that connects to phase 1 to access both of those lower roofs on both phases.
So this house is a super insulated building. the most custom and complicated part of the project is something that you don't really see after all the walls are closed up, and that's our wall assembly. Unlike conventional construction, we have 2 layers of exterior insulation on the outside, as opposed to traditional wall cavity insulation between the bays. We also have a continuous air barrier, making the house almost completely airtight. Our walls are an R44. It's a 2x6 standard wall with dense packed cellulose and 2 layers of 2-inch poly-iso exterior insulation. The roof is a 2x12 with dense packed cellulose and another 2 layers of exterior insulation on that. We also insulate with 4 inches of EPS underneath our slab. And again, the continuous air barrier and high performance windows. So why do we add the insulation to the entire outside of the building? We basically want a continuous blanket over the entire structure, and adding insulation over the entire building eliminates thermal bridging. And thermal bridging happens when a more thermally conductive material allows a pathway for heat flow across the wall assembly. So without exterior insulation, thermal bridging occurs through plywood and studs in traditional construction. So if it's hot or cold outside, the surface temperature can transfer in and out of the building. And uninsulated studs allow heat to flow in or out of the building 3 times faster than any uninsulated cavity. This is a drone photo of that entire building with the 2 layers of polyiso on the outside. And then the photo on the left just shows that below grade, we also installed rock cell insulation that can be submerged and the dirt can be pushed right up against it. So below grade, we installed the rock cell. Above that, it's 4 inches of polyiso. So air tightness is one of the most important aspects of high performance homes. The goal is to have no leaks, and we want to have as much control of the interior conditioned air as possible. We don't want any air leaking in and out of the building. So the entire building is wrapped in an airtight vapor permeable barrier. We tape all the seams at every transition and window. The product that we use is Mento 1000. It's provided by 475 Building Products. The photo on the right is a 10 mil poly called Stego Wrap. Before we pour our slab, that goes on top of the insulation that we installed. All the seams are taped underneath there as well. And then we bring the poly a few inches above the slab and tape that to the concrete to continue our air barrier. You can go to the next slide. So once all that process is done, that's early on in the project, how do we prevent leaks going forward? So everyone on the team is explained that you must notify the site supervisor before making any holes or any penetrations in the air barrier. That first photo is a photo of just some electrical that needed to penetrate the air barrier. Every penetration is gasketed, taped, and sealed. So once all the rough is done, all the windows are installed, we test the entire building a couple of times with a blower door. Before we run our official test, we set up the blower door first thing in the morning, and we depressurize the house and then search the entire building for any drafts or any air leaking through. We use a smoke pen to identify any issues. And the photo on the right is represents the blower door. At the beginning of the day, we had 392 CFM that was leaking out of the house. We spent maybe 4 or 5 hours chasing leaks, and we got that down to 284, which is the equivalent of 0.32 ACH 50. which is 50% better than, almost 50% better than the passive house standard, which is 0.60. So the high performance windows, they're triple glazed European windows. The windows and doors in this house are incredible, and unlike anything else we've ever installed. ZED did an incredible job creating so many large openings. The house is just bright any time of the day. There's so much natural light, and it seems like no matter where you stand in the house, you have a great view of the conservation land in the back. The windows that we use are provided by European architectural supply in Acton, and they're imported from Europe. They're triple pane glass, and all the frames are thermally broken. The next slide. A lot of the windows in the building are extremely large. Some of them needed to be installed by 6 to 8 people at a time. To install them, the glass is actually separated from the frame. We install the frames, and then using suction cups, we install the glass into the frames after the fact. Go to the next. Also, same company provided all of the high performance doors. Again, a lot of teamwork. There's a lot of prep work involved, flashing the windows, making sure that they're airtight once they are installed, and making sure that if any water gets in behind them, that they have a way of getting out. And it's interesting because the installation of the windows, there's 2 steps to it. You need to be extremely detailed with the prep work, but it takes a lot of brute force to install them. All the frames are installed first. That window on the right is like a 9-foot door that has it's a triple slider. The frame is installed, and then each sliding panel is installed after the fact.
And I'm actually not sure what Ryan's complaining about, because the lines on my computer screen are really light when I move them all around. So, yeah. So now that we've sort of got the envelope all sealed up, we've got our windows and doors in place. We've basically given our house a really nice winter jacket that keeps the heat in the winter and the cool in the summer. And what that allows us to do is really minimize the size of the mechanical system that we have to put in the house to heat and cool it. So in general, the brand is not necessarily critical, but it is definitely a dialed in system. It is a designed system that is all electric. And then another thing with making our homes so airtight is that we need to put in a system, it's called an ERV, that basically is continually pulling in fresh air and continually expelling stale air. And as it does so, those 2 air streams pass basically over one another, but don't interact, so that that heating or cooling from the indoor air can get transferred to the incoming air, so that we don't lose that energy either. And as I mentioned earlier, those high efficiency systems basically get us to an 80% reduction of a typical utility bill, and then that remaining 20% is made up by renewables, i.e. solar panels, and then we have an energy monitoring system to make sure that these systems are performing the way we want. The nice thing is that, especially with a PV array, there's enough energy that we can support electric car charging. So in terms of these mechanical systems, just because it's small doesn't mean it isn't, doesn't take up some space. While this mechanical room was technically able to fit all of the pieces of the puzzle, and this is on the phase 2 side of the house, Ryan's team really had to carefully think through how to fit everything in. So in these images, you're looking at that ERV that's on the left. So it's pulling in that fresh air and exhausting the stale air. And then the middle image is one of the air handlers that basically conditions the air, either makes it cool in the summer or warm in the winter. And there's 4 of those air handlers, at least in phase 2, that are distributed throughout the house. This one's in the mechanical room. Others are basically tucked up into ceilings above closets or bathrooms. And then the picture on the right actually shows what are called the branch boxes that takes the larger tubes of the ERV and distributes them into those smaller gray tubes to basically feed each room in the house with either fresh air, or in the case of the exhaust air, it pulls that air from bathrooms and the kitchen. And if that didn't look complicated enough, behind the wall is a whole lot of other systems that really requires a lot of careful forethought and coordination amongst the contractors, the subcontractors, with Ryan and Zen leading the way. And it's not rocket science, but it does require just careful coordination. And what we can see in these images is that especially with a house that is technically 5 levels on each side, we really have to carefully plan for either chases or thickened walls and dropped ceilings that accommodate all of those various ducts to get from the various mechanical rooms or the air handlers to the various rooms in the house. So that kind of is like the summary of the mechanical system. And then all of the homes that we design are what we call PV ready. So there's conduit that's routed up to the roof, down to the mechanical room, and the critical components are installed so that a homeowner can either install a PV array on day 1, or for whatever reason, potentially wait a year or 2 down the road. And then similarly, we have electric car chargers in the majority of our homes, where again, the homeowner can choose between a standard electrical outlet, which is the slowest method, to a type 3, which is basically a proprietary system associated with a specific brand of car. So looking at the PV array on this house, you can see that we've got those panels up on the uppermost roof of both phases. And for this project, we were able to fit a nearly 16 kilowatt array. And we encourage our clients to use systems with microinverters. And basically this just makes the array that much more efficient. So like if part of the array is shaded, the rest of the array keeps performing the way it should. And this is going to give us an estimated production of basically just under 13,500 kilowatt hours per year. And one thing we always say is that we can design, and Auburndale can build a net zero energy home, but we can't control a net zero energy family. So this should be more than adequate for this house, as well as some electric car charging. And it's just up to that family to really make sure that they're not leaving the fridge open or TVs on, things like that. And kind of the last piece of the puzzle in terms of energy is an energy monitoring system. And basically, we will specify a whole house system that comes with an online dashboard so that both the client as well as ZED or Auburndale can monitor how the house is using energy. And the benefit here is that we're able to detect if an appliance or a piece of equipment is maybe having errors because like maybe the energy usage is not quite aligned, or potentially if a piece of equipment is starting to use energy progressively more than it should, that might signal that that piece of equipment, like a hot water heater, is reaching its end of life. And so we're able to preemptively go in and go, oh, looks like we need to start planning for a new hot water heater. Let's do it before it dies and we have a more urgent situation on our hands.
Yeah, so to achieve a successful outcome on a complicated project like this, for us, it's putting together the right team, making sure we're training everyone that's working on the project, setting expectations for our team, as well as the clients, detailed execution, and follow through. So when we start a project like this, we have to start thinking about what subcontractors are going to be worked with, who's going to be the main site supervisor, and how much of our team will be on the day-to-day project with this. So when we're assessing who should be on the team, we look at previous subcontractors that have worked on a project like this. There aren't very many. We use the same framing and siding contractor as we did on a previous ZED project. They've been on the entire project since phase one. And then we have to find the right subcontractors that are able to achieve that level of detail that we need to have an successful outcome. And we need to work with teammates that want to try something new, and a team or a subcontractor that is willing to accept that challenge. So we're responsible for training the team. There are multiple points during the project that we set aside and schedule into the project for training. So we'll do a training right at the beginning of the project before we start anything. We'll do another training right before we set the sills and start framing after the foundation is poured, because that's a critical transition that needs to be air sealed. And then again, after the frame is up, we'll do another training with everybody before we start installing our air barrier and installing insulation. And then before the windows come, we'll either work with the window company that supplied the windows for a training, or we'll work with them to do the installation. So it's also a big responsibility for us to constantly setting everyone's expectations. So this project evolved significantly, and it started out as a complicated project, but originally, like Matt said, it was a garage with a master suite, and it was a garage addition. And then that addition increased in size itself. And then the phase 2 project was originally just going to be a deep energy retrofit. And for some of the reasons that Matt mentioned, it wasn't feasible. So it's our job to manage the client's expectations with schedule, costs, and ZD and the client were turning to us for construction feasibility as well. And before we proceeded with any of the big changes, we all met as a team and decided whether or not we need to go forward with some of the dramatic changes that we made. So the most important part of our job is the detailed execution. The slide on the right represents the patio detail that is curbless. Matt Matt has this ability to think through every single detail on a complicated install like this and somehow fit it all into one drawing. And he's also always willing to work with us to sort out, how if it can actually be done, and in some cases if there's a better way to do it. But seeing a detail like that is definitely a thing of art. And follow through. We constantly need to work as a team with the designer. We need to have constant communication. We have weekly meetings with ZED. We're expected to do daily photo documentation, and we keep a Dropbox folder with all of the site photos, and we're constantly checking our work with things like blower doors, and just trying to make sure we're always following through with the plans and making sure that everything is exactly as they were drawn.
So just to circle back on something that Ryan tried to make me blush on in terms of my detailing, it's one thing to draw those details. It's another to know that you're working with a team that isn't just going to do it, but they're going to take the time to sit back and go, oh, well, actually there's a little tweak, or there's a major tweak. Can we do it this way? And really being able to work with contractors like Auburndale that will question those details and say, hey, we've got this different way that we can do it. And sometimes those are suggestions that we absolutely put into place. And other times we go, oh, well, there's this other considerations, we can't do it.
I kind of forgot to mention in that picture. So that picture was a mock-up. And so, that was something that was like, all right, well, can we do it? Well, let's not just start doing it. Let's do a small chunk of it and let's see if it works, and then get Matt's blessing.
For better or worse. And, and I think, looking at one of the questions that's coming in the chat, it's ZED is always open to working with any contractor and helping that contractor work with subcontractors that don't have high performance experience, because the assemblies they don't require extra skill. They do require extra forethought, patience, coordination that some contractors might not have. And so we're always willing to work with new contractors to help them learn these new assemblies, work with these new materials. But without question, it makes it significantly easier and more cost effective to work with a builder like Auburndale that has already learned a lot of those hard lessons, and we have that working relationship in terms of being able to handle the construction. So before we move on to the other questions that are coming in, just a short recap. So in terms of achieving net zero energy, we want to start with thoughtful design. We really want to focus on that envelope of the house. You've got to build it once. So why don't you build it right the first time and make it work for you by making it super insulated and super airtight, so that we can then put in the smallest mechanical system possible as a means to not just save energy, but also save money. And then on top of all that, we can add renewable energy systems for even more clean energy coming in. And again, all of that great design doesn't really mean much if it's not executed with careful and thoughtful craftsmanship. So on that note, I think we'll just take Q&A.
So I'll jump in because I've been sort of keeping an eye on the chat with the questions coming in. And Nick has been answering some of them, but I think it's probably worth at least addressing the questions in case the rest of the group has not seen them. But we'll go back to the very beginning. I think there was a question from Nancy that said the house didn't look oriented perfectly south. Is that true? And if so, how critical is that southern orientation?
Yeah, so Nancy, good eye. The property is kind of skewed at about a 10 or 15 degree angle, and that was also part of the influence of the design of the front of the house of playing off those angles. But in terms of the PV array, that 10 or 15 degrees is of course not ideal, but it's also not a deal breaker. And the other nice thing about this house, given that it is technically a flat roof, is that we can twist those panels when they're installed so that they do face truly due south.
Okay. The next question, which was from Sunwoo, is how is the siding secured to the 4 inches of foam board on the outside? Nick did respond to that with the 7-inch screws, but I don't know if you want to add any more detail to that, Ryan, or?
Yeah, so the 1x4 strapping, that's our rain screen, that's installed with I think it was an 8-inch or 7.5-inch screw. That goes, we pre-drill that strapping, so it sits flush once it's installed. It goes through the insulation, through the plywood, and then back into the framing. So yeah, it's a long fastener, and we have to hit the framing, which is definitely tricky. And then the siding's installed on top of that.
Okay, then John had a question about the window brand, which is Sucho. I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sure.
Schuco. Yep.
Schuco. Okay. And supplier is European Architectural Solutions. Okay. The question from Melanie was heat pumps, question mark.
Yes. So we use both ducted and ductless heat pumps in our projects. This house used entirely a ducted system. So there's a condenser on the outside, just like a traditional home, and then the various air handlers inside the house that are ducted. And we used a Mitsubishi system.
Okay. Then skipping down a little bit, what type of domestic water heating is used?
And I think I saw that
Did Nick answer that?
Nick got that correct. It's a Rheem, and that is also a heat pump hot water system. So similar to the heat pumps that are used for the heating and cooling of the house, we're also doing that for our hot water. Basically, it is finding heat in the air and pulling it and compressing that into the water to heat the water. So it's a very efficient system that allows us to completely avoid any fossil fuels in this home.
Okay. John asked how much of the PV array is needed to charge the car?
Good question. And John, I do not know the answer. And I won't even dare take a guess without having to dig some things up.
Okay, so forgive my ignorance here, that you may have answered the follow-up question with the air source water heater or tankless.
Yeah, and someone may have had a really good eye. Melanie may have had a good eye in terms of the mechanical room. So on phase 1, we just had the air source heat pump hot water heater that serves phase 1. And then in phase 2, we have one tank that is also a heat pump hot water heater, but we also have a backup tankless system. So if in the odd situation where there's, the kids are using taking a bath, someone in the lower bedroom is taking a shower, and they also are trying to run a load of laundry, we've got that sort of random occurrence factored in so they won't run out of hot water.
Very important. And then Scott had a question about the final HERS rating, which is, and the answer to that is that's TBD at this point.
Yeah. And I would also just chime in on, and I thank you, Nick, also for tackling these questions. While HERS is a good valuation of traditional home construction, it is also can be skewed in the sense that, for example, a really small home that's super energy efficient can actually have a pretty high HERS score, like up into the 30s, even though it's net zero. And I won't dig into the sort of nitty gritty of why that is, but just take HERS ratings with a slight grain of salt, because they really do favor larger homes, which in and of itself may not be efficient.
Okay. This other question about the interior wintertime cooling from the Rheem water heaters. Did you consider split heat pump water heaters with exterior evaporations like Sandon or SAHP?
Hold on. There we go. So the Rheem water heaters are basically going to be capturing that air from the lowest level. I'm sorry, it's be capturing that heat from the lowest level. So it's really not going to have any detriment on any of the living spaces. In terms of a split heat pump water heater, I don't think we've used that type of a system on any of our homes yet for the water heaters. But basically, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're in essence referring to almost the same type of split system that we use for our heating and cooling, and it just really hasn't made its way into the US yet. Sadly, the US market hasn't created the demand for manufacturers to really ramp up those types of product offerings.
Okay. And by the way, if I'm mangling any of these questions that people have asked, feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly. So that Sunwoo had another question about a discussion whether to install geothermal, AWHP, or air source, and why did you settle on air source?
Good question. So in terms of geothermal, geothermal can in general work if you have lots of space to work with. This was a decently sized lot, but even so, and Ryan can attest to this, that the site was kind of tight when all was said and done. And from our calculations, geothermal tends to not be the most cost-effective way as a clean energy source compared to PV arrays. So that's kind of our typical stance, and we always revisit that when a client asks for it specifically, just in case, you know, things change over time. Another big challenge in New England is all the ledge, which can make geothermal really, really cost prohibitive. The air to water heat pumps, no, again, that technology just really hasn't matured yet in terms of product offerings within the states, as well as subcontractors that really know how to install those, and most importantly, how to maintain them. A lot of subcontractors are still just trying to get their minds around the air source heat pumps.
Okay, so there was a question about how did you support the windows on top of the 4 inches of foam, and Nick answered that with the windows are set inside on the outer edge of a 2x6 wall frame. So if there's anything to add to that.
Yeah, the window goes in before we insulate, so it's installed flush with the sheathing, and then we actually bring the insulation over the window frame a little bit.
Okay. And the question about, do you expect the heat pumps to be enough in the coldest weather? Answered by Nick. Yes, the Mitsubishi Hyperheat units are about 80% effective down to minus 13 degrees. So even at cold temperatures, they are still very effective. If you want to add anything.
Nope, that's spot on.
Okay. And then a question from Scott, is there any system to integrate small wind turbines with solar and batteries? And are batteries included in the solar system plan?
Good question. Wind turbines, we have had clients ask for those in the past, and we've usually convinced them not to do it, mainly because a wind turbine is a mechanical component. It is something with gears and parts that have to be really well maintained to be to function and to work efficiently. So again, a PV array is just something that you can plop on your roof, plug it in, and just kind of let it do its thing for about its life cycle of 25 plus years, depending on the type of panel you use. So in general, we would push clients away from a wind turbine. And what was the other part of the question, Anne?
Are batteries included in the solar system plan?
Yes. So in phase 2, there is a storage room on that very lowermost level that can be adapted into a battery storage room. Basically, that's another thing that we plan for during design is routing empty conduits between, for example, that storage room and the mechanical room, as well as routing empty conduits between the two phases so that those two mechanical rooms can talk to one another. Yes, batteries you do have to think about in advance because I'd have to double check. I don't know whether it's Massachusetts or the national code requires that those rooms have dedicated ventilation just in case, or just in general, but also those rooms have to be fire rated in certain jurisdictions just in case those batteries light up. So this house is battery ready, but we're also still waiting for those batteries to reach kind of a cost performance ratio that's a little bit more cost effective.
Okay. And Ryan, there's a question here about, are you seeing more subcontractors interested in learning the new technologies and being involved with this type of building?
Yeah. So we actually host a monthly meeting called Building Science for Carpenters. And we've been hosting that for the past 2 years at our studio. And it seems like it's been growing, and there's more and more subcontractors and carpenters that are wanting to learn more about different projects like this.
Excellent. All right, so we're right at 3 o'clock, and Nick just posted in the chat the studiohpdc.org website if you'd like to visit that. Up on the screen, you'll see ZED and Auburndale Builders contact information. Feel free to reach out with any questions. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this, so we will post it for review. But thanks so much for being here and joining us and being such an engaged audience. Any last words, gentlemen?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.